Okay, so it's the following day from when I glued up my fretboard binding, and I need to get that tape off there before it sets in and becomes really difficult to remove. The glue should be nice and dry by now, so let's go ahead and get it off. By the way, if you're watching this video is kind of a follow-up or a reveal after the video where I did the binding, which is episode number 40 in the series. So if you haven't seen that, I strongly suggest you go back and watch that one first. Okay, so that's the tape removed. It's looking okay so far. The next job is to take the sharp chisel and just remove the excessively long bits of binding. Then we'll get in closer with a scraper and bring everything level with the fretboard. So now that the binding's more or less done, it's still got a little bit of scraping to do on the ends, but I've left it like that on purpose because we've still got to cap off the end of the binding. I did think twice about whether or not I was actually going to bind the end of the fretboard, because the inlay design that I've got involves a central line coming right the way to the end of the fretboard and then continuing on to the body. So I wasn't sure which would look worse, having binding on the side without it being capped off properly, or having the strip interrupted by the binding. I've thought about it and I've thought about it, and I've decided to put the binding on the end of the fretboard. After all, it kind of needs it after I had a little bit of a mishap on the end of the fretboard anyway. So we've just got to prepare a little strip to go in the end there. Before I do, I just actually need to cut off these excess pieces of binding at right angles. It doesn't have to be exact because we're more or less going to make the piece to fit, but I'm a little bit nervous because it's actually unsupported behind that bit of the binding, but I'm hoping a swift movement with a nice sharp chisel should cut it nice and clean. Here goes. Nope. Nope, not at all. Bugger. Let's try the other one. Let's have the chisel the correct way around this time, eh? Well, that side's gone okay. Now what am I going to do about that side? Don't tell me I'm going to have to strip that binding off. I think I'm going to have to re-glue that. See what it looks like. Yeah, so taking a step back, I know exactly what I did there. Number one, I should have probably made sure my chisel was razor sharp before I attempted to do that. And secondly, I was holding the chisel the wrong way around. I'm not used to working with chisels, and I always forget that the temptation is always to put this side of the chisel where you expect or where you want to have your flat edge, but the thing is, what will actually happen when you push down in with the chisel, it'll push off this angled edge and move this way. So I should have actually had the chisel the other way around. Not to worry, thankfully the shard on the face of the fretboard has actually come off more or less in one piece, so if I can get that glued in place, pretty much not going to notice that it was ever a problem. There will be a tiny little gap there next to the body which I'll have to fill with good old dust and glue, but I think we can get away with this. So just put a little bit of glue on. That should be okay once it dries, and we give it a little sand. I think we've managed to pull that back. Yeah, that looks fine. Funny thing is, we are going to have to let it dry before we have another attempt at cutting that off. Meanwhile, we'll just give this end a little bit of a file. maybe we'll go and give this chisel a little bit of a sharpen. Back in a mo. Right, that's the chisel properly sharpened, and that's had long enough to dry. It is only super glue. I could use a Dremel or something to cut this off. It would probably be a lot safer, but let's be brave and give it another go. Went straight through that time. That was without a tap. Right, that looks okay to me. At least as far as the angle's concerned. I have unfortunately, however, lost a little bit off the back here, which was unsupported where I applied that dust and glue. I think the best thing to do there, because the dust and glue is looking okay there where it's already dried, is to get that end piece in, and then we'll actually fill that with the dust and glue just the same, and effectively mould a piece out of it. It should be okay. I think the key takeaway here is that chopping the ends when it's unsupported at the end is a bit of a risky business. So I've just got two little offcuts of binding that I'm going to use to try and make this end piece. For the sake of speed, I'm actually, despite using wood glue on the sides, I'm actually going to try using super glue this time to see what it looks like. Okay, that will be more or less instantly dry, but I'll just give it a couple of minutes and then we'll try and cut it up. Time to mark up and cut the piece of wood to go on the end. More or less going to try and just wing it as best I can by eye. Now let's have a look at that corner where we had that little bit chip out. Time for a little more dust and glue. I think let that dry. We shall sand it up and see what it looks like. Just need to do a little bit of a clean-up job now, really. That's looking pretty square to me. Still looking a little bit messy here where I need to level it down with a scraper, and you can still see a little bit of dust hanging about on the corner there, again where it needs scraped over. But I think everything's to the point where I can attack it now with a scraper and hopefully get it more or less where it needs to be. So there we have it. That's pretty much it for the binding, and I have to say it's come off rather well, better than I expected. There's a little bit of imperfection, I would say, round the heel end, but perfectly acceptable. Looking at it now, I am reminded, thinking back almost a year ago, I haven't really done a very good job of cutting the fret slots above about, well, I'd say about the 18th fret. So I would imagine that even with a little bit of tactical crowning, the intonation of this instrument is not going to be fantastic right up the top end of the neck. I think I'm just going to accept that on this build. Take those lessons forward. I think a lot of people probably get their intonation a little bit off on the first ever build. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that this was going to look fantastic hanging on a wall, because to be honest with you, it might not play perfect. I mean, if truth be told, I very rarely play above about the 14th fret anyway, so it's not going to make too much difference to me, but it's certainly not acceptable for, say, a customer instrument. But that's okay. Hey, you know, it might not be as bad as I think. But just thinking back to when I did actually use my fret slotting jig, I do seem to remember that I wasn't using it properly. Even after the second attempt, I think it wasn't quite perfect. But hey ho, it is the first build. What can you do? But no, as far as that binding job's concerned, I'm very, very happy with that. There is actually a slight step at the end of the fretboard. That is sort of kind of on purpose. I was aware that I had the option of sort of making it level with the very peak of the fretboard when I put it on there, but I didn't, because I thought it would be quite nice actually to do a little sweep in the end of the fretboard, like a little indent like you quite often see on acoustic guitars. But I don't want to do that until we've tackled the inlay, because the inlay is going to be going right up to that white line anyway, so I can sort of carve it all in one go when I get that done. So yeah, that's looking good. I think the next job is probably going to be to prep the neck for actually shaping the back of the neck, which is the last and probably the most really scary job of this build, considering we're working with the palm wood. So join me next time for that one, and yeah, until next time, goodbye.